meet again. James with Love My Pups, My Breeder Supply. Today, heart murmurs. So, there's quite a bit of information here that I'm going to go over, so I'm probably going to break this up into two parts, so we'll see how far we get in the first part. So, yeah. So what we're going to talk about, what a heart murmur is, how you diagnose it, what the prognosis is for the doggy, whether this dog's going to have big problems, and what potential treatments are and outcomes could be. All right, so what is a heart murmur? A heart murmur is simply a sound that is heard that's to do with flow of blood in the heart. And they're graded between a 1 and a 6. A 1 being something that's barely noticeable, to a 6 that's something that is very, very loud. And we'll talk in detail about those various different grades. So what could be the causes of a heart murmur? Well, one thing could be a valve defect is a very, very, very common cause. So what we'll do here is I'm just going to talk about valves in general here. So what you've got the heart wall muscle, and then in between you've got then a valve. And this valve is a one-way valve and blood is flowing in this example from above to down below. And what happens is this valve is normally closed, and then when blood is pushed by the heart contracting, this valve then opens up like this and the blood flows through it. And then when the heart starts to contract, we don't want the blood going in the other direction. So then what happens is of course this thing collapses back to this closed position. And if you've got a defect valve, you can get some blood that then flows through in a kind of a turbulent fashion, and you could hear that as a heart murmur. So that's one example, a very common form of a heart murmur. Other forms of heart murmur could be because you've got some extra piping, there's some extra vascular connections in the heart that really shouldn't be there, but they are there, and because of that, blood's flowing around those and there's no valves to stop that from happening. Another cause could be that you've got very thin blood. If you think of this as, it's a pump, and so normally what you hear in a heart when you listen to it is this dub dub, dub dub, dub dub. There's contractions that are going on, and you get this kind of double beat that it's a lub dub, lub dub. If you've got a murmur in there, you've got a sound like a washing machine, a whooshing of a washing machine, so lub whoosh dub dub, lub whoosh dub. You get this extra sound in there, and it can vary depending on what the cause of this murmur is. So one of the things, by the way, that you should do is that you should have a stethoscope. You think of that as being something that's in the realm of doctors only. It's not, it's for all of us. A stethoscope costs, and it comes with our puppy care kit. I mean, you can buy a stethoscope for, I don't know, 15 bucks. And one of the things that you should do is you should listen to your own heart, and you should listen to the hearts of your puppies, and you should make a comparison. Because if you have a heart murmur, it's extremely unlikely that you'll have it in your entire litter, and you will be able to discern a difference between one dog versus the other dogs, and that should then spark your little bell going off to say, when I go to the vet for my vet checkup, I need to have him listen to this and tell me whether this is something I should be concerned about. And of course, any vet who's worth his salt, who's going to do a vet check on a dog, is going to listen to that dog's heart a number of different ways around their chest to determine whether or not the heart is in fact beating like a fine Swiss watch. But back to this situation, if you're got thin blood, think of it this way: if you had a pump and you ran oil through it, it might be nice and quiet. But if you ran water through it, it might be really clanky and noisy. And so there can be some conditions that cause heart murmurs that aren't even heart defects. All right. So let's talk about how you grade heart murmurs. So they are graded on a scale of 1 through 6. So we've got 1 here, all the way to a 2, a 3, a 4. I can count. How about that? And a 6. This is bad news. This one's probably not very significant. So this is called a, what's the right wording for this? There's a word for it, I can't think of it to save my life now. A sympathetic heart murmur, I think is what they call it. This is a heart murmur that is only detectable intermittently in a very quiet room with a dog is being very still. So it is significantly less than the noise you'd hear from the general heart sounds. So this is very, very faint. So it's very faint, and it may be intermittent, very faint and possibly intermittent. And by the way, all the tests that the vet's going to do are going to be on a dog that's laying on the table, that hopefully is not panting like crazy, that's a quiet dog. Okay, and I'm going to now go to the other extreme. This one is very loud, louder than the normal heartbeats, and it has what's called a thrill. And a thrill is a vibration that you physically can feel with your fingers on the chest. So that is the other end, and this is bad news. Okay, so where does it get to be important? Well, the cutoff line that somewhere in here is the point where we're starting to get concerned. So this can be heard. It's easily heard. It is not louder than a heartbeat, not louder than a normal beat, the normal heart rhythms. And typically it can only be detected on one side of the chest. All right, great. And these two, by the way, typically you don't do anything about these. And in puppies, it's very likely that these will completely go away by the time the dog is 6 months old. Specifically, this one here, almost always, is something that goes away. And it's just part of the growth process of the dog, that various bits of the dog are growing at slightly different rates. And because of that, you've got a heart valve that is not perfectly sealing, but it will go away. So a dog that has this, you're not going to do a darn thing about it. You're going to come back 4 months later or 6 weeks later or whatever and go do another listening and see whether it's improved or got worse. A dog that has these for the rest of its life leads a completely normal life, and you don't have to do anything special about it. Okay, so what's a grade 3? A grade 3 is, it's as loud as a normal heartbeat. So it's very obvious, and you hear this swishing noise that is as loud as the regular heartbeat you'd hear in a dog that didn't have any kind of murmurs at all. This one here is louder than the normal beat, and probably can be heard on both sides of the chest. This one is significantly louder, and it has a thrill. And again, this thrill is the vibration you feel. You can put your hand on the dog's chest and you feel a vibration. That's a thrill. Okay, so that's how the grading works. Now, there can be, I'm mostly talking about puppies here. So we're talking about congenital defects that will happen at birth, not defects that happen as a dog gets older. And I will touch on those things here in a little bit. But to start off, we're talking about dogs' congenital heart defects. These ones here are likely just a growing issue, and they grow out of them. This one here could go either direction. If it goes this way, great, it's not a problem. If it goes this way, it may be time to start thinking about what the quality of this dog would be. And this dog may have to have drugs to be a happy dog. And there is some evidence that it used to be that you didn't do anything for heart murmurs until you saw some symptoms, of impending crisis. Dogs that can't keep up, dogs that are short of breath, dogs that are fainting, that you'd start treating them. There is some evidence that actually, and the reason that you didn't treat those dogs before that was the thought was that these drugs, the dog would become used to these drugs and they wouldn't be as effective. But actually now, I think there's some different thinking about this, and grade 3 heart murmurs maybe should be treated, specifically in older dogs. And there's drugs, there's a couple of them, and for the life of me, pamamodin, I think, is one of them. They're not cheap, and you give them to the dog for basically probably the rest of its life. Dogs, by the way, don't have heart attacks like humans do. Heart attacks in humans are typically caused by narrowing of the vessel, caused by things like plaque and cholesterol. Those problems don't affect dogs, so they tend to be more structural problems. And but they can still die because the heart can't physically pump enough blood around the body, and the dog succumbs to that. Okay, So where are we going to go from here? I think now we're going to talk about, right, well I think the takeaway on this graph, this thing is, 1s and 2s don't get overly worried, 3s you've got to pay attention to. If 3s are going that way, it's fine. If they're not, it's a problem. And look, now what should you do here as a responsible breeder? Well look, every dog that we ever are every dog that we have goes to the vet and has a checkup, which includes listening to the dog's heart. And we do this ourselves anyway, because we want to stay on top of this. So what do you do if you've got a dog that comes back with a grade 3 heart murmur? Well, the answer is that dog, it does not, you need to let people know. You can't just send somebody a dog and let them go to the vet and find out there's a heart murmur, because they're going to be upset with you, quite rightfully so. Dogs that are in that 1 or 2 category, I just would keep that dog and make sure that that disappears. And if it does, all's fine, not a problem at all. If it develops into a 3 or better, then I mean, this is a dog that you may have some problems deciding where this dog is going to end up. It's probably going to be a pet home dog. And so the people who get the dog need to realize that potentially there could be a problem, and it could be developing something that is more significant as time goes on, to the point that they may be spending a fair amount of money on drugs. So that dog's value in terms of it being sold as a puppy have obviously been dramatically reduced, maybe to 0. Okay, so there are congenital defects, which is what we talked about to start with. Well, let's talk about some symptoms. What would be the symptoms of a dog that has a heart defect? So what would you see? So you may see some or all of these things. You may see a dog that's short of breath. It can't keep up with the rest of the pack. It might have blue gums. And this is true of all dogs, whether they're puppies or older dogs. It may have blue gums, a sign that it's not getting oxygenated properly. It may cough a lot. Another sign. It may have a distended stomach. Distended stomach. It may faint or have what seem to be dizzy spells. It may just be a lethargic dog, general lethargy. So those are, but you see the problem here is that, shortness of breath, any dog, any person or dog can get short of breath. They've been exercising like crazy. So just shortness of breath by itself doesn't get it. Blue gums, there can be other causes for blue gums. Typically dogs that aren't well may, one of the things you do is look at their gums, and if their gums are nice and pink, you get worried there's something going on. Doesn't necessarily mean it's got a heart failure. Coughing a lot, well, I mean, it could have kennel cough, distended stomach, well, it might be constipated. Faint or dizzy spells. This could be other problems, neurological in nature. Lethargy, some dogs are more active than others. So you can see that, unfortunately, if you see these things, it's time to start thinking about what may be going wrong. And the very first thing to do is get your stethoscope out and listen to the dog's heart. And if you can't do that, go to the vet. All right. So those are the signs, the potential signs that you've got some kind of impending problem. And those are the kind of things that you're going to see more with dogs as they get older and maybe they start to have heart problems, that you might start to see those things coming on. These aren't necessarily heart murmurs that happen right at birth. Congenital heart defects, yes, but other kinds of defects can occur later on in life. So let's talk about those. There's things called extracardiac events. Extracardiac means outside the heart. These are not because of structural problems of the heart. These are because there's something else going on. An example would be a dog that's loaded up with parasites or fleas. It's getting a huge workload on it. Its blood count, its red blood count is dropped. It's thinned its blood out, makes for a noisier heart. Fix the problem. This might just go away. So that's an extracardiac. So there's other things that are extracardiac events to do with the well-being of the dog. Typically things like heartworms would be another one. Now, you should have a regime to heartworm your dogs on a regular basis, because a heartworm will cause heart problems that can be irreversible if you don't catch it in time, but are reversible, or certainly make a lot better if they're treated correctly. So, I'm talking here about parasites, sick dogs, heartworms. You need to have a heartworming regime in place, heartworms. And then another one would be dental work. Dogs that have bad dentures can have, they'll have, infections in their teeth that can end up and lodged in the heart and end up in a heart valve and cause problems. So some of these things can be prevented in the first place by not getting a sick dog or giving heartworm medication or getting regular dental checkups on a dog. And those things can stop and even reverse problems that are causing heart issues. Okay. We're going to go for the whole thing here, and we're just going to bore you with an entire 20 minutes worth of me talking rubbish to you, rather than split this up. Okay. So let's see, where are we now? I've got to think what I've been talking about. So we talked about so far about what a heart murmur is, how you diagnose it. We've talked about how you might see it for other causes other than actually structural damages in the heart. So what is the treatment? Well, dogs that are a 3 or better may need to be on medication. Some dogs won't show any signs that they're doing fine. And those dogs, if they're not a 4 or a 5 or a 6, can probably have a completely normal life without having to have any kind of medication. Dogs that are a 4, 5, or 6 that are underlying extra cardiac issues probably need to have medication. And so that will impact potentially the amount of time they live and how active they are. And some dogs you want them to run around and fetch a frisbee, and other dogs you want them to sit on your lap. So, that just depends on where they are in their life and where they are in the lifestyle with you as to whether or not this is something that's going to cause them huge problems or something that's manageable. I'm sure there's a lot more I should be telling you, and for the life of me, I'm not very organized on this. See if we can drum something else up, or whether this is probably good enough. Yeah, well, yes. Okay, so here we go. So now we've got the whole genetics issue. Should you breed a dog with a heart murmur? And this is one that you're going to hear different things from different people. There are vets out there that they hear any kind of a heart murmur and they're like, no, don't breed that dog. And there are other vets who will say, the heart murmurs are 1 to a 2, maybe a 3, maybe you're going to be okay with it. So this is my take on it. So the first thing is there a hereditary component to heart murmurs? And the answer is there is in certain kind of heart murmurs. And that is a question that really you should have with a specialist to determine exactly what kind of a heart murmur is caused. So that requires things like probably a ultrasound or a Doppler, a 3D Doppler echocardiogram to find out where the cause of the problem is, and then what the necessary treatment or no treatment is. So let's talk now about what's the likelihood that these generally are caused by genetic abnormalities. So the answer is probably that they will not occur again if you breed to a different stud. If you do a different pairing, they probably go away. These are pretty rare events, and the reason I know they're pretty rare events is it's hardly ever happened to me in many, many, many puppies that I have seen produced by my studs and I produced myself, but they're not zero. So if you had 2 dogs, so the next thing is there is no test, no genetic test that you can go have done that says, oh yeah, that dog has got a propensity to have heart murmur puppies. There's no test for it. And also, if you start looking at the number of genes that are involved in making you and me and a dog, it's like 30,000 genes. And potentially a single gene can cause disaster. But you've got another dog that you're pairing this with who also has 30,000 genes. And to get this, so we're going to say that the gene that's causing the problem is gene number, we'll just call it 30,001. That's the gene, that's the specific gene, that's the one that's causing the problem. We can't test for it, but that's the gene. Okay, so this dog over here, he has a genetic defect on gene 3000, and that's a comma by the way, 3002. Well, it's completely not relevant to this tier. That dog doesn't have a problem. That puppy may inherit this from this dog and this from this dog, and those 2 genes don't match up. It doesn't show any of the symptoms. It leads a completely normal life. That genetic problem is not an issue. And remember, if you could see your genetic profile for you, you would not sleep well at night, because you have a lot of bad genes floating around in your genetic pool. Luckily, the chances of you having a baby with somebody else with that same defect is pretty damn small. And that's why we don't see very many defects in humans and in dogs. It's relatively rare. In fact, if you look at the chances of two dogs, and we'll go back to a good old Punnett square, of two dogs that had this bad gene. So we're going to say this dog has one copy of not the bad gene. We'll call it B for bad. It looks better. It has one copy of the bad gene. And just by chance, you mate that to a dog that also just happens to have that same 3001th bad gene. What's the chances of that dog will suffer from it? Well, that dog there doesn't. And that dog there is a carrier of it, but doesn't have the defect. And that dog there is a carrier of it, doesn't have a defect. And there is the problem. 25%, 1/4 of the time, you end up with a problem. And the most likely place for that to happen is that people are inbreeding or line breeding dogs, which is something that we don't do. And unless you're in the show ring, there's not much reason for you to do it, probably. Well, that's where the risk is. If you start line breeding, inbreeding dogs, you quite likely, because they don't have a lot of genetic diversity, both dogs might have this same bad gene in the same place. And because of that, it's quite possible that you could have this thing pop up in 1/4 of the puppies. So if you're in a situation that you have 8 puppies and 2 of them have got this defect, you have to think about hereditary conditions. If you've got 10 puppies and only 1 of them has it, I suspect it's not a hereditary condition. But to be safe, I would breed those 2 dogs together just in case. So I don't think it's I suspect that a lot of these heart murmurs have got nothing to do with hereditary. It's just part of the process that something doesn't go quite right during the process of making a dog. And it's not a hereditary factor. But some of them supposedly are hereditary factors, and there are particular kinds of heart issues that do have some hereditary component. But for the most part, if you take a dog that has produced, and I'm talking about, do you use a dog that's produced heart murmurs? If you have a dog that's produced heart murmurs, I breed back to a different dog, and I suspect the problem will go away. Now, if you have a dog with a heart murmur, that's a different situation. I don't think that you should, if a dog has got a grade 1 or grade 2 heart murmur that disappears, wouldn't worry me in the least bit. If you have a dog that has a 1 or 2 heart murmur that turned into a grade 3 or got worse, I wouldn't breed the dog. So that would be a death knell for that dog having puppies, but not probably necessarily a problem for that dog, and certainly not the death knell that you shouldn't breed those dogs again. Right, there we go. I've wasted lots of your time. I hope it was useful, and thanks for watching as usual. Bye. Thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate people who subscribe to me. It helps me, encourage me to do more of these videos. But do remember, disclaimer here, I am not a vet. I'm not a licensed medical professional. I'm purely a person who's been breeding dogs for the last couple of decades. Any information that you got from this video, use at your own risk. There's nothing implied here, and certainly this should not be used as a substitute for advice from your veterinarian or your medical professional. I hope you enjoyed the video. Come back for more of them. Bye.